Welcome to BKL Nightly. This is Thad Brown along with Carl Jones. It's the Let's Talk Ball edition. We are, as always, breaking down the X's and O's from every single Bills game. This time it's going to be the Bills' loss to New England, that surprising game on a Sunday night. And Carl, I think the easy way to start with this one is with the offense, because of the two sides of the ball, that's the one that I think surprised everybody the most. The Bills only, putting up 20 points after having, 18 games in a row, whatever it was, scoring 30 in a row. And the thing that stuck out to you, and I thought this was interesting because I didn't quite see this myself, but it makes a lot of sense now that you bring it up. This game, in a lot of ways, looked eerily similar to the Houston Texans loss last year.
Yeah, not necessarily in the stats. I think Josh Allen was 9 for 30 in that game, and he was
Correct.
brought down a lot, and the offensive line really struggled. But the Houston Texans are built in some similar ways to the Patriots in the fact that they have really good outside corners. Actually, that's selling them short. One S tier, that's Derek Stingley for the Texans and Christian Gonzalez. And then they're really good number 2, Carlton Davis, was the other outside corner for the Patriots. And doing so, the Patriots played a lot of man coverage, especially on got-it-have-it situations, to where Keon Coleman, Josh Palmer, whoever was lining up outside wasn't fearful. The Patriots weren't scared of those two guys, and they were just essentially playing 9-on-9. So if those guys, and you're not fearful of those guys going deep, well, Khalil Shakir's not beating anyone deep. Dalton Kincaid, who had a fabulous game, you're not really scared about him running past a safety 40 yards down the field. So that's why maybe the passing game at least felt a little touch and go. And also, kudos to the Patriots. They did a good job of stopping the run, not necessarily shutting them out, but making sure that those James Cook runs that would go from a 2-yard gain to 8 or 9, the Patriots kept it around 4 or 5.
I think you saw, in my opinion, the Mike Vrabel effect the most on defense, because this team looked disciplined top to bottom, all over the field, all game long. In the run game especially. Look, in the run game, they have bodies. Milton Williams, Christian Barmore. Barmore, I had to laugh. In the first Bills possession, Barmore got a pressure against 3 different offensive linemen. Now, the offensive line was pretty good after that, but, this is a guy that can wreck games on his own and made his presence announced, right off the bat. But against the run, I was very impressed at how many different defensive linemen caused problems and how often this team was in the right spot. Even if the Bills got a block in, even if some of the Bills' concepts worked, they worked, like you said, for 3 or 4 or 5 yards, not for 30 or 40, because this team was consistently fighting, consistently in the right spot. And in the pass game, too, the other thing that stood out is the Patriots rushed 4 virtually the whole game. I mean, sending a linebacker or a corner was so notable that it stuck out like a sore thumb. But they did so without giving Josh Allen many scramble lanes. So when you face a defense that maybe you don't have the talent top to bottom, but like you said, they have it on the outside, they have it up front, and then everybody else is where they're supposed to be all day long, it made the sledding very, very difficult for the Bills.
And I want to make this clear. We talked about this off air. The Bills offense, for most matchups, is going to get what they want because they can run the ball on their terms, and Josh Allen can do enough to lift everyone on the outside. It's just that there are certain defensive teams that have the personnel that can slow down the rushing attack. I don't want to say completely shut it down. And then they can shut down the receivers on the outside. So the Bills have to figure out some different avenues in order to move the ball, at least in an explosive fashion. The Bills still were in this game and could have won this game, though, without the self-inflicted mistakes. I mean, you had 2 fumbles, the Josh Allen interception, the 11 penalties. I think back to the singles, and I think this sums up the game. I believe it was the third quarter where they're driving. Khalil Shakir gets an offensive pass interference that turns a 3rd and 1 into 2nd and 13, I believe. Josh Allen throws a pick on the next play. The Bills were moving the ball, but they couldn't get out of their own way. And I think the Patriots' defense stylistically caused some problems as to where, yes, that methodical approach can work, but if you make a mistake, then you did all that for naught. And I want to give, like you said, Mike Vrabel his kudos for getting his guys to buy in to that game plan.
The thing about the penalties, too, I was going back through the last few years. The Bills have been top 10 in NFL penalties committed, most penalties, the bad side, basically is what I'm saying, for the last 5 years. The only year they weren't was the year they played one less game than everybody because of Damar Hamlin. So this is a team that's committed penalties consistently. Now, not 11 per game like they did the last 2 weeks, but they have been a team that has been okay, being heavier on the penalty side because they have, the horses to get around it. And look, the thing that stuck with me while watching this film that you say all the time was styles make fights. And The Patriots style in this game is going to be such a pain in the neck for the Bills every single time they play this team because of where they're strong and how, again, disciplined they are every single other spot. This is just a bad matchup for the Bills.
Think back to that Pittsburgh Steelers game where the Patriots played them a few weeks back. The Steelers, all of their guys outside of DK Metcalf on the outside, they have like 3-4 tight ends and fullbacks that they don't mind throwing the pill to. And the Patriots aren't strongest at safety and linebacker. That's why Dalton Kincaid went off. So styles make fights. And 100%, once again, there aren't many teams that are built like this. The Texans, who the Bills will see later on this year, are the better version of this defense. So it'll be interesting to see how the Bills come up with a wrinkle for that game. But sometimes, you just got to shake your opponent's hand and say, good job, we'll get you the next time.
Let's explore a couple different points that we kind of hit on and glossed over while we're talking about the bigger picture of this game. First, with the Josh interception, you as the defensive back, former Division I player, I think you got a good idea of how good the coverage was on that. I know Josh said later he didn't think it was a bad decision. Carl, watching it, on film, it looks like a really bad decision and it's a really bad everything from the quarterback point of view.
Yeah, I don't want to speak too much to Josh Allen's read and progressions to get to Khalil Shakir on that play, but it definitely wasn't his first read. And
for sure,
for the fact that Marcus Jones, who was the player who picked that off, to pick off a backside dig running across the field and undercutting Khalil Shakir like that is super darn impressive in man coverage. So Josh can say what he wants, and I'm not going to sit up here and say that he's wrong for feeling how he feels in terms of his arm arrogance, because that's the reason why he's one of the best players ever. But in that specific play, that DB made a hell of a play, and if he didn't make that play, that safety was going to break it up either way.
Yeah, that's the thing. The interception is a great play, but that's never going to be a completion because the safety's on top of it too. The interception too, to me, it looked like Khalil had kind of throttled down a little bit and was running, but not sprinting as he went through the zone. Whereas Marcus Jones, who's got return man speed, was all out speed trying to chase it and allowed him to chase that down and make the interception. So I understand where Josh might have been surprised by the pick, but that thing is never in a million years going to be a completion because, like you said, the safety is already there. With Dalton Kincaid, look, you and I have both talked on this show and on the Sunday night show, the postgame show, about how, look, Kincaid's a good player, but he doesn't bring the full package that you can have if you want to use a tight end as your lead receiver, your other option after the run game, because he can out athletic a linebacker, but he can't out physical a defensive back all the time. That being said, beyond the 6 catches he had, and look, to your point, the creamy middle of the Patriots secondary is as creamy as it gets. He still had other plays in this game where he was wide open and the Bills either couldn't get to him or went to another read earlier before looking to Kincaid down the field.
Oh, yeah, that's not Kincaid's fault that the other team is weak there. That's what he's supposed to do. And I think his receiving skills were never in question. Maybe the heights of those skills have been in question over the years, but in terms of a good receiving tight end, I don't think anyone ever doubted Dalton Kincaid in that. And I think that he has taken a step forward into that department. Not just as we saw last year, the Bills for some odd reason always gave him these quick screens, these quick outs, and said hey, you go be a yak player. And I thought, at least watching him at Utah, Dalton Kincaid did a lot of damage down the field, not necessarily 30 or 40, but in that intermediate 10 to 20 yard range. And that's where he really killed the New England Patriots. So Joe Brady has his hands tied behind his back, at least to a certain extent, with Dalton Kincaid, because he is such a phenomenal weapon as a wide receiver. But because as an inline blocker, folks, I want to make this so abundantly clear, because the Dalton Kincaid blocking discussion can get toxic at times. Mm-hmm. Dalton Kincaid on the perimeter has done a phenomenal A+ job of doing his 111th. The problem is, on a whiteboard, those are wide receiver blocks. Tight end blocks are the stuff that you see Jackson Hawes and Dawson Knox do, and it's really hard to play a guy like that more than half of the snaps. He still was out-snapped by Dawson Knox in this game, and with how amazing he played. So Joe Brady's gonna have to be creative to figure out a way to get him on the field and utilize him, because he is by far a top 2 pass catcher on this team in terms of reliability. But how do you figure out a way to make sure that he is a bigger focal point of this offense without being a huge tell? Hey, he's in the game, we're passing the ball.
even the wide receiver blocks he was asked to do in this game, I thought he had a bad game for that. I'm with you that most of the rest of the year he's been fine. He was not good as a blocker in this particular game, and that's still a risk when you use that guy in the field. Offensive line-wise, I was really impressed for the most part, despite the talent on the other side. Milton Williams and Christian Barmore caused some problems, but this group across the board, the few blitzes they saw, they dealt with them very well. I thought the pass protection in general was pretty good, so I thought this was a plus offensive line game. And Carl, I want to just sum this up and kind of underline the long-term impact of this, because, oh my goodness, the Bills didn't score 30. It is a brand new thing, for this offense. Is there a long-term concern, or how much of one is there coming out of this game? I know we've kind of established that New England, Houston, there are teams that can do this. But I've been saying all year, even in the games the Bills have scored 30, when they don't run it, they run into these problems anyway, not for 60 minutes like they did on Sunday night, but for 15, 20, 25. And when they're not catching roughing the punter penalties, this might be more of a problem. Where are you on kind of the big picture of where this offense is after what we saw happen Sunday night?
I wouldn't put it in some bucket of like, hey, it keeps me up at night. And I wouldn't say it's even to an extent where like, hey, oh my gosh, they need to rectify this problem yesterday. But I do think there is enough evidence, at least since week 2, at least from our vantage point. I know the Jets game could throw that out, but
exactly
the Dolphins, the Saints, and last week against the New England Patriots, the passing game has just never felt cohesive outside of the designery stuff. Like outside of the quick orbit motions or the quick screens or the play action chunk shots. In terms of just a drop back passing game, Josh Allen has his back foot, lets the ball rip. It doesn't happen as often, or at least as clean as it should. Some of that is due to the wide receiver personnel. Some of that is due to the fact that I think the offense is constructed in a way to where they don't rely on that too often. So I do think there is some concern, enough to make me be like, oh my gosh, everyone go trade for Jamar Chase. No, but I do think that there is enough for my antennas are going to be up to watch it Monday night against the Falcons.
I wanted to compare this because I charted this and didn't know how much actual information I was gaining from this. 26 dropbacks for the Bills in the second half. More than half of them, 14, were either scrambles because there was no one open downfield, or RPO wide receiver screens, or checkdowns. In other words, like not drop back and throw offense. And it felt to me like the percentage needs to be higher, especially when your quarterback is the MVP. So, I'm going to keep an eye on that, maybe look around the league, compare that to other teams to see if that number is, that much of an outlier.
I will say one more thing about that number, and I have it in front of me with Next Gen. Josh Allen has scrambled on 20% of his dropbacks. He's been the least pressured quarterback this year. That goes hand in hand with what you just said about how Josh Allen shouldn't need to do that because he's the MVP.
20% is a big number, I assume, for scramble percentage?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a ranking handy or no?
It is second in the NFL.
All right, well, that's all we need to know. All right, yeah, there you go. All right, let's go to the defensive side of the ball. And me and you, I think, land in the same spot with this. 23 points is not that bad. I mean, look, we need to know who this Bills defense is. They're not the Texans. They're not the Browns. They're not the Packers in terms of being able to shut teams down. 23 is right in line with what their average has been this year. And even, Carl, the film kind of revealed that this was not a game that the defense really did anything that was alarmingly different than the first 4 games.
No, I thought that the first half, and excluding that final drive of the first half, they played really sound. And I thought that they were really disciplined in something that you would expect from a Sean McDermott defense. The pass rush integrity was there when Drake May tried to escape from the pocket, especially up the middle. They were always there. Remember in the second quarter, I know it got an offset because of penalties, but Terrell Bernard chased down Drake May on their own sideline. The run game, they did a good job of stuffing that as well. I thought the defense played very sound in the first half. Second half, it was a combination of that pass rush integrity that Sean McDermott likes to always talk about wasn't there as much. And Drake May, I think, eventually telling the NFL audience, hey, I'm not Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson yet, but that next bucket of guys that y'all always like to talk about, them Justin Herberts and all that, put me with them. And that, because the final 30 minutes of that game was as good as quarterbacking that you're going to see in the National Football League, considering his offensive line, his running game, and the fact that, yes, Stephon Diggs played great, but you can't name another receiver that looked great on that team outside of him.
Because they don't have one. You're right. I mean, the personnel around them are not very. Look, even Will Campbell, the high-priced first-round pick, looked at times like a rookie. Joey Bosa had a couple different reps where you could tell, okay, this kid's new, and Joey Bosa's not, and Joey Bosa's still really good. With May, it wasn't just the end of the game too. He made throws throughout the game that I thought were early, even more anticipatory than Josh Allen was in year 2, even year 3 or 4, to where he is not throwing guys open, but when you let the ball go early because you trust your receiver, makes it very hard to defend. Let's roll that quick into the conversation about the corners, because I think this was the big controversy coming out of this one. Look, Trey White, I think we've been concerned about from day one, but this wasn't even a great Christian Benford game on paper. What was your read on the 2 starting corners for the Bills?
Yeah, it wasn't a great showing for them. I think 2 plays come to mind from Trey White's perspective. There was a 3rd down in the second half, 3rd and 3. The Patriots motion over a receiver. And usually, from a cornerback perspective, if receivers are tight, we want to be on different levels. One corner's pressed, one guy is off. Trey White was initially pressed. He saw the receiver come over, and then he hesitated, and it was like, oh, snap, let me back up. Because he hesitated, the ball was snapped as he's backpedaling 4 yards off the ball. Newsflash for anyone that is watching this. There is no cornerback in the history of the National Football League that should be backpedaling 4 yards away from somebody. Get out of Dodge. You need to be at least 7, 8 yards off the ball. And because of that, Stephon Diggs beats him for a 1st down and turns into an 11-yard game. And then I don't need to jazz up the big explosive play that he gave down the field where it scrambled drill and he should have stayed on top of Stephon Diggs. Just wasn't a good showing from him. And then Christian Benford, I don't think was bad by any stretch of the imagination. I thought he was okay. But when you have a cornerback one, you would just like to see him get his hands on the ball a little bit more often. The Kayshon Boutte played down the left sideline. I know it's tough. It's 20 yards down the field with a comeback, but they didn't pay you to just tackle guys out of bounds. They pay you to make some plays on the ball. So I think those 2 guys in particular, they got to be better Monday night against the Atlanta Falcons.
Totally agree on the long play to Boutte, the 18, 20 yard or whatever it was. The coverage there is not bad,
right?
But it's not bad for a guy who is on his rookie deal or is a free agent you signed off the street. That's not your elite CB1 play, even as good as the throw was for May. Real quick, I want to go back to the Trey White backup play because I want you to explain this a little more. Obviously, you don't want to be backpedaling at the snap, but why does the depth matter so much in that particular situation?
Yeah, so I mentioned that if 2 receivers are somewhat close to each other, you don't want to have cornerbacks who are on the same levels. And for those who are listening to this audio, I apologize, but I'm going to do it as best as I can to describe this. We all see plays where wide receivers and offenses run these things called pick and rub routes. You can easily do that when the corners are on the same levels because the receiver can just run over there and pick them. But if the cornerback is off the ball, you can't pick them. Think of that. You guys watched the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday night. That pick play on the goal line, that wouldn't have happened if the cornerback was off the ball because I can just run over the pick.
You can
and Trey,
switch, in other words.
Exactly. Yeah. Trey White, I know for a fact, was like, oh, snap, let me back up. The problem is, as soon as he saw the motion come over, he should have backed up. He waited too long to do so, or don't back up. Just play man and just pray it's not a pick play or fight through the pick. He was just too indecisive right there. And that's where it's like, hey, man, this is year, whatever it is for Trey White. That's not what I want to see. That is separate of the physical stuff that we've seen on tape. That's just a mental bust that I'm sure they talked about the next day in film.
Goes back to the thing you say all the time, even in coverage. If you don't play the right thing, if we're all wrong, we're still all right. In other words, if you're Trey White, you can be up at the line of scrimmage and play man and hope it's not a pick, or you can be 7 yards deep. But if you're at 4, you're nowhere, and that's allowing a reception to happen.
Bingo.
All right, let's move it to another point that you brought up with this Patriots offense, something that Josh McDaniels did later on in the game, because early in the game, Drake May did not look like the quarterback that was about to ascend. He looked like he was a young kid who was in a big game for the first time, not comfortable. Even later in the game, he was still running from pockets where he didn't have to. Mm-hmm. But the Patriots made an adjustment that really changed how comfortable May was in the pocket later in this game.
Yeah, Josh McDaniels' name gets thrown in the mud sometimes because of what happened in Denver. Let's not get it twisted. He's been able to design some really good offenses. I know he had Tom Brady, but he is a very brilliant mind, and you saw it in that second half, and it began in that final drive of the first half. The Patriots don't have a stellar offensive line. You mentioned Will Campbell. The right tackle isn't much better. So what the Patriots did, they brought in a pony personnel with 2 running backs, and they would put them next side by side with Drake May. And most pass snaps, those running backs would just go up and just chip the defensive ends. And then they would go out on routes, and they would create gaps in the defense to where, Hunter Henry's running an over that's 20 yards down the field, and the running backs are releasing late. It puts those flat and curl hook defenders like the linebackers and Taron Johnson in conflict. So good on Josh McDaniels knowing his own personnel and knowing that the Bills like to get after him with 4. chipping Joey Bosa, chipping AJ Epinesa and Greg Rousseau every single snap. And that is where your Ed Oliver comes into play so much, because that would have presented a lot of one-on-ones for the guys on the interior. And without TJ Sanders as well, they weren't able to win enough of those. And even when they did, Bobby Babbage realized they're chipping those guys every single play. Let's loop our defensive tackle outside. Daquan Jones isn't Drake May athletically. So it's still, I really, really enjoyed what Josh McDaniels did right there, knowing his own personnel and executing it to brilliant fashion.
And to your point, Bobby Babbage later in the game, charting blitzes, right, for the Bills defensively. First half of this game, 4-man, 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 4-man. And then all of a sudden in the third quarter, 5 zone blitz, 5-man blitz, 5-man, 5-man, 5-6, So in the third quarter, you could tell that Babbage had realized that he was not getting home with 4, and Drake May was just sitting back there waiting for someone to get open and making something happen. And the adjustment was to send everybody. Later on, like you said, the stunting happened too. So it was fun to see, the back and forth. I really thought this was not a good Babbage game, not because he was dumb. It was a game where, like you said, the other guy just had better answers. I mean, the other one stands out to me was the last Patriots touchdown run, where he's got the entire defense slanting on the fullback, going off tackle right, and just throws the flip to Ramondre Stevenson. And Stevenson could have, walked in backwards without a problem. So the designer, really, Joe Brady too, we didn't talk much about him. The designer touchdown calls for him are really good in this game, but also for McDaniels, the big plays, I think he won more often than he lost in this one. I do want to point out a couple guys who played well in this game. To me, I like Shaq Thompson, and Carl, I want to get your take on this. Look, he's a guy that there were moments in this game where you could tell that at 30 plus, he doesn't quite have the quickness. It was funny, the play where Drake May got chased on a stunt in the fourth quarter and Travion Henderson leaked out to the sideline. Shaq Thompson does not look like a guy that can hang on that route. But other than that, he did look like a guy who was very confident, knew where to be. There was a wide receiver screen. No, it was actually a running back screen, where it wasn't a screen with the offensive lineman. It was a screen with the receivers blocking, where Shaq was on it from the weak side of the field, chased it down and made a tackle for like 5 or 6, but just the reaction time was there. Where the Bills now have an issue at linebacker with Dorian Williams and Matt Milano potentially out for a while, Shaq Thompson is a guy who at least knows where to be and where to go on the field.
Yeah, and you can delay father time a little bit when you know what you're doing out there. It's me. I'm the guy who always talks about athleticism and how cool it is to run a 40-yard dash. But even guys like Max Harrison, they can't play 4.2 speed if they don't know what they're doing out there. Even Shaq Thompson, often an Achilles, he may be running 4.9, but it don't matter, because his instincts can get him up to like a 4.7 and make great plays like he did Sunday night.
With Max Harrison, and I was thinking about this too, and I want to run this one by you also. How much of a difference does he make? Understanding that I'm asking you this question where we have no idea what he knows and how comfortable he will be. But there were multiple times where I looked at Trey White chasing a route and just sheer quickness seemed to be the problem, to where, okay, Max Harrison in theory, can solve that. But again, that's all in theory for a guy that has not been on a football field since basically the end of July. If that is the answer at some point, and I think whenever he's healthy, it might have to be, considering where the Bills are at, what kind of an impact do you think he can make?
On a whiteboard, he will make a great impact. Having a player that can do all the stuff that he can do physically changes a lot that you can do defensively. I was looking, they never said this publicly, but we all read between the tea leaves, and the Bills made it clear that they wanted to be a little bit more versatile and play more man coverage this year. Through 5 weeks, they haven't played any more man coverage. I think we know there's some limitations at the CB2 spot that prevents that. But Max Harrison has 1.5 padded practices as in the National Football League. He's been out since that day. Are you really going to throw him into the wolves in the middle of a playoff hunt and expect him to be better than Trey White when he wasn't better than Trey White back then either? It's a lot to ask. I'm hopeful. I know the Bills are hopeful that he can get up to speed quickly. It's a lot to ask. I'm just going to say that he hasn't been playing football, and you're just going to throw him into the second hardest position in the sport and just say, hey, go run around and chase guys who get paid to do this for a living.
I agree with you. I think it's a real tall task, and I don't know where the Bills. People have talked about maybe the Bills trade for a receiver, the trade deadline. I mean, it might have to be corner. Now, look, they still have Dane Jackson. They can trot out and give it a try too if they want to, bring him up from the practice squad. But the fact he's been on the practice squad while we watch this happen week after week might be all you need to know about Dane Jackson at this point. At least what the Bills think of him. Two other things I want to point out here. Number one, for me, Deion Walker continues to improve. There were a couple plays in this game. Before this game, I've been saying that Deion Walker is a big man who plays like an athlete, right? There were a couple plays in this game where he looked like the big man, where he was throwing guys out of the way. It's not a lot, but every single time I see 96 on the field, he's a little better than what he was last week. And at that size, with the athleticism that we have seen, the ridiculous ceiling exists in the Deion Walker world. We're not even close to it yet, but the fact that we keep climbing and climbing and climbing makes me wonder how close we might get to that this year. I want to go back to the secondary for the last point on this show today. When you talk about what the Bills do in pass defense, we focused on the corners today. But these safeties, the way they are played, this combo, you've said it before, they basically play from the parking lot. And there were a couple different plays in this game where, and especially the 2 Hunter Henry catches, where it felt like the safeties are just too far back to have an impact. Now, look, I understand, safety, underline the word, exactly what it means. You don't want something going over your head. And this is how the Bills defense has been since Sean McDermott rolled in. But when you have issues at your corner spots and your safeties are not going to do anything but just be the moat at the end of the castle to make sure, no one gets in, I don't know. It seems like it's exacerbating the problem the Bills have in the defensive backfield.
I'll make this quick. On a whiteboard, the safeties are doing exactly what they're told to do. Keep everything in front of you. But doing what you're told to do and doing what the whiteboard tells you leaves this pass defense in the position that it's in. They don't have many, or I think they have one pass breakup this year from a DB.
They're second least pass breakups in the NFL. I think the number is 11, but it's number 31.
And that happens because you do what's told on the whiteboard instead of being instinctive and making plays out there on the ball. I think Cole Bishop is getting a little better in that department. But yes, you don't need to be in a parking lot when Hunter Henry's running up the seam. I think you should trust your athleticism over his.
All right. So the Bills suffer their first loss. There's things to clean up for sure. We are going to have more to talk about when it comes to Bills and Falcons next week. Remember, you can catch this show every single week, not only here on Rochester First, also on WIVB+. We're on YouTube. We're on Spotify every single week. All right, for Carl Jones, I'm Thad Brown. We'll see you again next week talking Bills and Falcons after the Monday Night Football extravaganza. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you later.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.